So I think there's a general agreement that Europe's security situation is, as you said, challenging. And as you've mentioned, there's this very broad array of reasons as to why that is. But do you think that perhaps there is a hyper focus on technical fixes? There's currently the talk of the Great Drone Wall across Eastern Europe, which is going to be an integrated multinational defence system. So it'll be a series of incorporated drone defences, which essentially covers the eastern flank of Europe to defend against any Russian incursions and to act as a deterrent power. I think back to a few weeks ago, we saw the events in France where there was a kick-off, to put it bluntly. I believe it was the French Army Chief of Staff, a guy named General Fabien Madon. Forewarning, my pronunciation there might not be perfect, but he was talking to a congress of French mayors, and there was an outcry when General Madon warned of the French spirit, that it lacked the preparedness or the willingness to accept that France and the French people might have to suffer and lose their children in war. And so that suggests to me that there's a deeper reluctance to face and talk frankly about the personal and societal risk that war brings. So do you think that policymakers are perhaps solving the easy problems, these technical problems, and neglecting these harder discussions about risk and loss and suffering, which could actually itself then be driving risk because it might be exacerbating recruitment crises or a lack of general public awareness of the threat level, because we are unwilling to have those harder discussions and we are more willing to talk on easy solutions, and that's these technical solutions?
So what I think is with threats, visible threats to European security, the kind of drone incursions in Poland, in Denmark, and elsewhere this autumn, and the rapid response to, build a great drone wall across Europe, it is reaching for that technological situation. And there's been lots of emphasis on increased military spending and investment in military hardware. But I think what's missing is, while we can talk about technologies, we can count the number of tanks, we can quantify the billions of euros that are being directed into military spending, it's much harder for European policymakers to clearly articulate between military capabilities and what those strategic objectives they want to achieve with those military capabilities. So the expansion in military hardware has outpaced most European states' capacity to clearly articulate what their strategic objectives are, but also what role would their citizens be taking in achieving those strategic objectives. And furthermore, the European Union as a geopolitical actor remains quite ambiguously defined. What role is it going to take in continental security? Whilst member states are very keen to, demonstrate their investment in military capabilities, the European Union is having difficulty with articulating a clear strategic intention and indeed a role for itself in defense and security. The danger of that is having accelerating rearmament without a cohesive political message and clear strategic objectives can become quite destabilizing.
Do you think we're looking at a genuine new normal for European security, that we are going to be seeing this increased level of sustained threat perception and higher defence spending? Or do you think this is a temporary spike that could fade? If there is a change in the US administration that reaffirms a commitment to Europe, do you think Europe will tone down its new defence spending and reshaping defence? Or do you think it's one where actually now what has happened to trigger this rearmament spending, to trigger this focusing on defence, is permanent, that the change has been made and it now cannot go back? And if you don't mind me following up on that, what indicators would you watch to tell the difference? So if you're somebody who is watching European politics, watching this rapid ramp up of defence spending, what are the indicators that you look for to see if it's going to be a sustained effort or if it's a temporary spiking effort?
this represents a new normal. So regardless of the next administration, I think we have to acknowledge that US hegemonic power has diminished. And even long, long before Donald Trump, and actually going as far back as the Eisenhower administration, there's been a desire on the part of US presidents for Europeans to shoulder a larger share of the responsibility for European security. Talking about Europeans in this context is, of course, European NATO allies. So I think spending more on defense will be a reality, particularly as the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, they may reach a ceasefire agreement. They may reach some form of peace in inverted commas agreement, but there is going to be considerable instability and concern about the shape of that conflict going forwards. I don't think that this will end neatly and nicely with peace breaking out all over and a happy return to the Europe of the 1990s. In terms of indicators to watch to tell the difference between, we're making lots of noise about increased defense investment versus the reality for the long term, it's probably not going to be the kind of stuff that makes headlines or makes for good sound bites. Things like saying we're going to spend 800 billion on defense is a great soundbite, but it is looking through various budget documents and seeing what money is actually allocated, what money actually gets spent, and where.
I was 10 years old when the Brexit debate happened, so my interest in politics kind of grew at a time as we were seeing the acceleration and increasingly loud debate about nationalist strategy. We saw that in the Brexit referendum here in the UK. You see it with the rise of Trump and the America First agenda. How can government, so the UK government or actually the national government of any European nation state or state in whatever iteration of Europe we use, how can a government make a credible case for long-term European defence cooperation whilst there is this domestic current too? Do you think, say, the shared wartime history of Europe, going through World War I and World War II, might that help? Could that be utilised more? Or is there another way that you can make the case for this very collective security?
I think we have to go back and look at what are the drivers for the nationalist movement, typically on the right end of the political spectrum. We've seen this throughout Europe. I mean, Britain has probably been the most vocal, but, this was certainly something that has been we've seen it in France, we've seen it in the Netherlands, we see it in Germany and elsewhere across the continent, that there is this skepticism with membership in the European Union, with greater desire for a renationalization. But what are the drivers of that? Are they economic drivers? Are they social drivers? And thinking particularly in the case of Brexit, is it a lack of understanding about how the European Union works and what its interaction is with the UK, for example, as a nation state? Because I also see many of these movements taking root. I'm thinking in particular AfD in Germany, taking root in the east of the country, which has had lower economic performance, is facing a lot of challenges, and of course not part of West Germany for many decades and only rejoined Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall and has been playing both social and economic catch-up since then. I think we really have to look at the drivers of these nationalist movements and finding effective counter to them. Now, security might not be the most effective counter argument to that, but trying to understand those movements, and I think part of the challenge is many of those have particular emotional quality to them, and they're typically fear-based. And how do we, as we saw in the Brexit debate, that meeting fear-based emotion with rational facts doesn't always win over your opposing side. So finding an effective way to recapture those populations that are attracted to these nationalist movements.